Yeah, so I was working at a management consulting firm helping Fortune 500s design these incentive structures and ultimately implement them into their systems. And one of the things that I saw was the time span it took to execute. So, like I said earlier, 6 to 8 months was the average time to deploy a comp structure within these Fortune 500 organizations. And so one of the things that I saw as a massive pain point was the limitation of the platforms to enable these organizations to move quickly, the data that they used, and ultimately the amount of resources required to execute on sales comp led to this very rigid process. And so, I had seen the pain points in 2014, 2015, and I always thought it was broken and it needed to be radically rethought. Instead of the once every few years, let's redesign the incentives to create the desired outcome from the sales team, and let's bring these consultants in to kind of come up with that. My view of what the future of sales should be is a seller wakes up, they look at their phone, and they're told in real time, if you close this opportunity in the next 2 weeks, you're going to get double the amount of commissions. If you don't close it in 2 weeks, you're going to get a fraction, 25% of your commissions. Why? Because we have enough data, whether it's recordings of sales calls, to activity data, to intent data from the customer, to actually tell us that if this deal doesn't close in the next 2 weeks, the likelihood of it closing afterwards is almost negligible. And to me, the way, to enable that type of agility and that individualized type of incentive structure, you had to rethink the entire structure and process of how comp was managed within these Fortune 500s. And so I had left consulting and went to a tech company. And while I was there, I got reached out to by a customer that I had worked with in my consulting days at ZS. And that customer, Stryker, had worked with us to help them revamp their sales comp process and implement them on one of the incumbents in the space. Exactly. And so we stood up and I implemented with a team at ZS, implemented the sales comp process. And shortly after leaving ZS, I got reached out to by Stryker because they needed support in reconfiguring this tool. And it was one of those things where, being brought in to reconfigure the platform and recognizing that if every time you needed to make a change, you needed 4 to 6 months heads up and professional help where, with individuals that have experience and expertise in a specific tool set and the architecture of these platforms, it meant that there's no way we were going to get to that vision of the future of tailored, individualized incentives that drove to business outcomes faster than we do today. And that was how I came up with the idea. And it was only a year later from that first outreach from Stryker to me personally, where I had the full vision of what we wanted to build and at Forma, and ultimately led to us pitching Stryker on a completely revamped and different approach to sales compensation.
Okay, so you worked with this company Stryker in Canada to help them implement sales compensation software. Soon realized that every time they wanted to make a change, there was a whole bunch of work involved that took months to implement. And that got you thinking about, there has to be a better way. Maybe there's software that, I could go and build and solve this problem better. And so the company who you just installed this software for, you pitched them on some other software that you were going to go and build. So how did that go down?
Yeah, if you think about the time span, right? The original implementation of the software happened years ago. So it was 2 years later that I pitched Forma. And I think if you think about the way that most organizations buy software today, typically they're buying and implementing software, and especially so in sales compensation, they're buying and implementing software for day one, when really a lot of these enterprise applications are actually solving a day two and on problem. And if you think about in sales comp specifically, every time you have a go-to-market change, every time you acquire a business, every time you change your hierarchy, your territories, you hire new reps leave the organization. All of these things are changes that ultimately need to be managed from a sales compensation perspective. And so one of the things that, the solution that we stood up with them solve the problems on day one. Now, I left ZS, something changed. All of a sudden, the solution no longer works, and they need to go back to the professional services firm that implemented it. I was no longer at ZS. I was the one who knew that instance and ultimately was the reason why they reached out to me directly. Because I even, at that time I even mentioned, I was like, I'm no longer in that world, and I didn't leave ZS to take business away from ZS. Like I'm working in tech. You should reach back out to ZS. And the answer was, ZS doesn't know our instance. You're the one who set it up. You know it. We want to, we need your help. And I think that was the root cause that I was aiming to solve. Because the moment that you need a specialized set of skills to manage the kind of the configuration of comp processes within an organization, is the moment that now you're bottlenecked. And anytime you need to make a change, you need to spend months revamping this, the infrastructure of these systems.
Okay, great. So there's already sales compensation software out there, but you can see from your experience that it's not meeting the needs of these customers and potentially creating a lot more work for them than they want or need to have. And so you've sort of figured out, okay, if I build a product, this is how I would differentiate. This is where this product could fit into the market and solve a very specific problem or situation. So that's great. But like, where was this coming from? Had you started a startup before? Did you kind of have a tech background? What was your experience in kind of building this type of product and company?
I was entrepreneurial by, from a background perspective, and I actually had a business with one of my business partners, Max Bailey, who was the co-founder of Spoonity, the tech company that I had joined. So Max and I ran a custom software dev shop in Kingston, Ontario, the town that we went to school, Queen's University. And so we had built a small business, experienced that, and my background is engineering. And so I was technical by nature. I had seen this problem, but it was certainly the scale and the vision that we had, that I had with Forma, and ultimately that we have of addressing this problem in sales comp is certainly much bigger than anything I'd tackled before. To me, it was I said that quote earlier, success comes when chance meets preparedness. And by no means do I think success is a relative term and a constantly moving target of what you want to achieve. But I do think there is an element of, in that moment, I saw a customer that I had deeply cared about. I had, worked with these individuals in solving their problems for years in my past life as a consultant. And I saw the pain points that they were going through. And I did want to solve that problem because I had felt it personally. I had worked in sales comp for, many years at ZS and touched many different organizations. And I saw the same thing happening over and over again. And so did I have the vision of, solving this problem in a radically different approach and aiming to the North Star that we're aiming to today? Yes. But in that moment, it was, what do I need to do to tackle the required solution to help this, this customer and help, these individuals solve the problem that they were experiencing and that I had experienced firsthand. And so the North Star was the same. I think in those moments, had I known all the things that had to be done and solved to get us from where we were as a company back then to here, I probably would have been afraid and actually not done it, especially given the fact that I used my own money to kind of start the company. I think it would have potentially changed my willingness to do that. But in that moment, I had a lot of conviction and confidence that we were going to be able to go from the promises that we made to Stryker to delivering on those promises when we had to. And I think that was ultimately the conviction that I needed to get going.